Lydia Monroe stood on the platform in her wedding dress for 3 days, waiting for a husband who didn't exist. The letter had promised a rancher named William Sterling a home, a future, safety. Instead, she got silence, stares, and the slow realization that she'd been conned. No money, no ticket home, no options, just a white dress turning gray with dust in a town that had already decided what kind of woman she was. She was preparing to sleep another night on a wooden bench when a small voice cut through her shame. My daddy needs a wife. Will you marry him instead? If you want to see how a woman abandoned at the altar rebuilt her life from nothing, stay until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lydia's story travels. The train had left 2 hours ago, and Lydia Monroe was still standing on the platform. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not really. Waiting implied hope, and hope had died sometime around noon on the second day. Now she was simply there, because there was nowhere else to go. Her cream-colored wedding dress, once carefully pressed and wrapped in tissue paper, hung limp and wrinkled against her frame. Dust from the Wyoming wind had settled into the lace at her cuffs. The hem was brown where it dragged across the planks. She'd stopped caring. Around her, the town of Coldwater went about its business. Wagons clattered past. Men tipped hats without meeting her eyes. Women whispered behind gloved hands, their judgment as sharp as the wind. Lydia had become a fixture, pitiable, then embarrassing, now simply invisible. She sat on the bench near the station house, her small trunk beside her. Inside were 2 dresses, a Bible her mother had given her, a silver hairbrush, and the letter that had ruined her life. She didn't need to open it. She'd memorized every line. Dear Miss Monroe, I am a rancher in Coldwater, Wyoming, in need of a wife. I own 300 acres, raise cattle, and live simply but honestly. I am a man of my word. If you accept, I will meet you at the station on the 14th. Wear white, and I will know you. Respectfully, William Sterling. The letter had arrived 4 months ago, passed along by a friend of a friend in Philadelphia. Lydia had read it a dozen times before responding. She wasn't naive. She knew what a mail-order arrangement meant, but she was 26, unmarried, and living in a boarding house where the landlady reminded her weekly that rent was due and sympathy was not. Her prospects were thin, her savings thinner. So she'd written back. She'd been careful, honest. She told him she wasn't a beauty, that she had no family, that she could cook and sew and keep a house but had no dowry. She told him she wanted a partnership, not a romance. She wanted security, a place to belong. His reply had been brief. Come. So she had. She'd spent the last of her money on the train ticket west. She'd sewn the dress herself, sitting up late by candlelight, stitching hope into every seam. She'd imagined the moment 100 times, stepping off the train, scanning the crowd, meeting the eyes of a man who'd chosen her, even from a distance. Instead, she'd stepped onto an empty platform. No William Sterling, no rancher, no future. At first, she'd assumed he was delayed. She waited by the station house, smiling nervously at passing strangers. Hours passed. The station master, a wiry man named Horace, finally approached her with the awkward kindness of someone delivering bad news. You waiting on someone, miss? Yes, Mr. William Sterling. He's a rancher here. Horace had frowned. Sterling? Yes. He owns 300 acres, raises cattle. The man scratched his jaw, then shook his head slowly. No Sterling in Coldwater, miss. Not that I know of. Her stomach had dropped. Are you certain? Been here 15 years. Know every ranch within 20 miles. He hesitated. You got a letter? She'd shown him. He'd read it carefully, then handed it back with a grimace. I'm sorry, miss. This ain't real. The words had hit her like a fist. She'd asked him to check again. Asked if maybe Sterling lived farther out, beyond the town. Asked if maybe he'd been delayed, injured, called away. Horace had been patient, but firm. There's no William Sterling, miss. Someone took your money. And just like that, her life had collapsed. She had $11 left. Not enough for a ticket home. Not enough for a room. Barely enough to eat. She'd spent the first night on the bench, wrapped in her shawl, shivering against the cold. The second day, a woman from the church had brought her bread and water, murmuring something about charity and poor choices. The third day, no one came at all. Now it was late afternoon and the sky was beginning to bruise purple at the edges. Lydia stared at the horizon, numb. She had no plan, no strength left to make one. She heard footsteps, small, quick, deliberate. "You still here?" Lydia turned. A little girl stood a few feet away, maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded blue dress and boots too big for her feet. Her hair was dark and tangled, pulled into a braid that had half come undone. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her eyes were sharp, too sharp for a child. "Yes," Lydia said quietly. "I'm still here." The girl tilted her head, studying her. "You've been here 3 days." "I have." "Why?" Lydia didn't know how to answer that. "I made a mistake." The girl stepped closer, unbothered by propriety or caution. "You waiting on a man?" "I was." "He didn't come." It wasn't a question. Lydia nodded. The girl crossed her arms, considering. "You got anywhere to go?" "No." "Any money?" "Not much." The girl nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she said, matter-of-factly, "My daddy needs a wife." Lydia blinked. What?" "My daddy. Ethan Cole. He's got a ranch about 5 miles out. Mama died 2 years ago, and he's been trying to do it all himself, but he can't. The house is a mess, the books are wrong. He don't eat right, and I need help with my schoolwork." She paused. "Will you marry him instead?" Lydia stared at her, too stunned to respond. The girl waited, patient as stone. Lydia shook her head. "Sweetheart, that's not how it works." "Why not?" Because people don't just... Your father doesn't even know me." "Don't matter, you're here. You need a place. He needs help." The girl shrugged. "Makes sense." Lydia felt a strange, hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest. "What's your name?" "Maisie Cole." "Maisie, I can't just..." "You can come for supper," Maisie interrupted. "See the place. Meet him. If you don't like it, you don't have to stay." Her eyes, dark, serious, fixed on Lydia's. "But you're going to freeze tonight if you stay here." Lydia looked down at her hands, pale and trembling in her lap. The girl wasn't wrong. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Maisie didn't hesitate. "Because you look like you need help, and so do we." There was no pity in her voice, just practicality, honesty. Lydia took a slow breath. What did she have to lose? "All right," she said. "Just for supper." Maisie grinned, quick and bright, and grabbed Lydia's hand. "Come on, wagon's over here." The ranch was farther than Lydia expected. They rode in silence, Maisie handling the reins with surprising confidence for a child. The wagon rattled over uneven ground, past scrub brush and rocky outcroppings, toward a line of distant mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Lydia had never seen anything like it, so open, so empty. In Philadelphia, there had always been walls, crowds, noise. Here, there was only sky. "That's ours," Maisie said, pointing. Lydia followed her gaze. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides. There was a barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and a modest house with a sagging porch. Smoke rose from the chimney. A few cattle grazed in the distance. It looked tired. Maisie pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. "Wait here," she said, hopping down. She disappeared inside. Lydia sat, heart pounding. This was insane. She didn't know these people, didn't know what she was walking into. But the alternative was another night on that bench. The door opened. A man stepped out. Ethan Cole was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His dark hair was too long, his jaw shadowed with stubble. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, stained with work. His eyes, gray, guarded, swept over her once, then flicked to Maisie. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "She needs a place," Maisie said, "and we need help." "Maisie? She was going to sleep outside again, Daddy." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Lydia again, and she felt the weight of his exhaustion, his frustration, his reluctance. "I'm sorry," Lydia said quickly. "She insisted. I can go." "No." His voice was rough, but not unkind. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You came all this way.
Least I can do is feed you." He turned and walked back inside without waiting for a response. Maisie beamed. "Come on."
The house was exactly what Maisie had described, a mess. Dishes piled in the basin, laundry heaped on a chair, paper scattered across the table. The floor needed sweeping, the stove needed scrubbing. But the bones of the place were good: solid wood, a stone fireplace, windows that let in light. Ethan moved through the space with practiced efficiency, pulling out bread, cheese, cold beef. He set the food on the table without ceremony. "Sit," he said. Lydia sat. Maisie sat beside her, chattering about school, the chickens, a fox she'd seen last week. Ethan didn't speak. He ate in silence, his gaze distant. Lydia watched him carefully. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 32, 33. But he carried himself like a man who'd lived twice that. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the meal." He glanced at her, nodded. Maisie kicked her under the table. "Daddy," she said pointedly. "Ask her." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Maisie, ask her." He set down his fork, jaw tight. "I didn't tell you to bring her here. But she's here and we need help." "That's not—" "When's the last time you balanced the books?" Maisie challenged. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't burnt?" Ethan's face flushed. "That's enough." "She sewed that dress herself," Maisie continued, undeterred. "She came all the way from Philadelphia. She's got nowhere to go. And you need someone." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." The room went silent. Ethan stared at his daughter, something raw flickering across his face. Then he looked at Lydia. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Lydia said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "She's not wrong." His brow furrowed. Lydia took a breath. "I came here for a marriage that didn't exist. I have $11 and no way home. I'm a good cook. I can sew, clean, keep books. I don't need romance. I need work." Ethan studied her, wary. "I'm not asking for charity," she continued. "I'm offering a trade, room and board in exchange for labor. That's all." He was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "1 week," he said. "Trial. If it doesn't work, I'll pay your train fare east." Lydia exhaled. "Deal," Maisie grinned. And just like that, Lydia Monroe, abandoned bride, failed dreamer, found herself hired. The first night, Lydia slept in a small room off the kitchen that had once been used for storage. Ethan cleared it out without comment, bringing in a cot, a blanket, a pillow. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She lay awake for hours, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, trying to process what had just happened. She'd come west chasing a lie, and somehow she'd stumbled into something real. The next morning, Lydia woke before dawn. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and stepped into the kitchen. The house was silent. She lit the stove, found flour, eggs, lard. Within an hour, she had biscuits baking, coffee brewing, and bacon sizzling in the pan. When Ethan came downstairs, he stopped in the doorway, staring. "You didn't have to—" "I did," Lydia said simply. That was the deal. He didn't argue, just sat down, poured coffee, and ate in silence. Maisie appeared a few minutes later, eyes bright. "Smells good." "Thank you." The girl climbed into her chair, grinning at her father. Ethan ignored her, but when he finished eating, he looked at Lydia and said, "Thank you." It was the first crack in the wall. Lydia spent the day cleaning. She swept floors, scrubbed dishes, organized shelves. She found the account books, smudged, incomplete, full of errors, and began sorting through them. She mended torn curtains, patched a hole in Maisie's dress, and made a list of supplies they'd need from town. Ethan worked outside, fixing fences, tending cattle. He came in at noon, ate the lunch she'd left for him, and went back out without a word. By evening, the house looked different. Not perfect, but livable. When Ethan came in for supper, he paused in the doorway again. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "I told you I would be." He nodded, sat, ate. Maisie chattered between them, filling the silence with stories about school, questions about Philadelphia, observations about everything and nothing. Ethan didn't speak much, but he listened. And when Maisie finally went to bed, He looked at Lydia across the table. You don't have to do this, he said. I know. Then why are you? Lydia met his eyes. Because I made a choice to come west, and I'm not ready to give up on it yet. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then he nodded. And Lydia knew she'd just bought herself more than a week. She'd bought herself a chance. The chance turned into days, and the days began to shape themselves into something resembling routine. Lydia woke before sunrise each morning, her body adjusting to the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She'd light the stove, set coffee to boil, and start breakfast while the house was still dark and quiet. By the time Ethan came downstairs, there would be food on the table, biscuits and gravy, eggs and bacon, sometimes flapjacks if she had enough flour. He never said much, just nodded his thanks and ate quickly before heading out to work. Maisie was different. The girl filled every silence with words, questions, observations that tumbled out faster than Lydia could answer them. She wanted to know everything about Philadelphia, what the buildings looked like, whether Lydia had seen the ocean, if there were really gas lights on every corner. Lydia answered patiently, watching the child's face light up with each new detail, recognizing hunger that had nothing to do with food. This was a girl starving for connection. After breakfast, Maisie would head to the small schoolhouse 3 miles down the road, riding the old mare Ethan kept for that purpose. Lydia would spend the morning working through the house, laundry on Mondays, baking on Tuesdays, mending on Wednesdays. The work was endless, but it was honest, and it was hers. The afternoon she spent on the books. Ethan's record-keeping was a disaster. Numbers were transposed, dates missing, entire transactions recorded in margins or not at all. She found receipts stuffed in drawers, bills wedged between pages, calculations scratched onto scraps of wood. It was clear he'd been trying, the handwriting was careful, deliberate, but equally clear he had no system, no training, and no time. She started over from the beginning, creating new ledgers with clean columns and clear headings. Income, expenses, debts, assets. She cross-referenced everything against the scraps she'd found, building a picture of the ranch's finances that grew more troubling with each page. They were barely breaking even. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks into her stay, Ethan came in early and found her surrounded by papers, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Something wrong?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "I didn't hear you come in." "You were focused." He nodded toward the ledgers. "Find something?" Lydia hesitated. They'd barely spoken beyond pleasantries and practical necessities. She didn't know how he'd react to criticism, even indirect. "May I ask you something?" she said carefully. "Go ahead." "How much did you pay for feed last month?" He frowned, thinking. "About $40, maybe 45. She turned the ledger toward him, pointing to a line. "According to this receipt, you paid 60. Ethan leaned closer, studying the numbers. His jaw tightened. "That's not right. It's what Henderson charged you. Henderson said 40. Henderson wrote 60 on the receipt and you signed it." Ethan's face darkened. He straightened, running a hand through his hair. I was in a hurry. Had cattle getting out. I just signed. Has this happened before?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was rough. "I don't know. Maybe." Lydia closed the ledger gently. "You're being cheated." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan turned away, staring out the window. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. She could see the anger there, and beneath it something worse, shame. "I'm not good with numbers," he said finally. "Never have been. Sarah used to handle all this. After she died, I just tried to keep up." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife by name. Lydia chose her words carefully. "You've been doing the work of 3 people. Something had to give. Shouldn't have been the accounts. Maybe not, but it's fixable." He looked back at her, skeptical. "How?" "I'll go to town with you next time. Review the bills before you sign them. Henderson won't pull that trick if someone's watching. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. That was the arrangement. Room and board for labor. This is labor." Ethan studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. "All right," he said quietly. "Next supply run, you come along."
She nodded. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lydia? Yes? Thank you. The words were simple, but the weight behind them wasn't. She heard exhaustion there, and relief, and something that might have been hope. You're welcome, she said. After he left, she sat alone in the quiet kitchen, staring at the ledgers. For the first time since arriving in Coldwater, she felt something other than fear or desperation. She felt useful.
That night, Maisie helped her make supper, vegetable stew with the last of the winter potatoes and some salt pork Lydia had found in the larder. The girl chattered while she worked, telling stories about school, about a boy named Tommy who'd put a frog in the teacher's desk, about a spelling bee she'd won last week. Daddy didn't come, she said suddenly, her voice going quiet. Lydia glanced at her. To the spelling bee? Yeah. He said he would, but then a calf got sick and he had to stay with it. Maisie stirred the pot, not looking up. It's okay. The calf lived. The matter-of-fact tone didn't hide the hurt underneath. I'm sure he wanted to be there, Lydia said gently. I know, he's just busy. All the time. Maisie finally looked up, her dark eyes serious. It's better since you came. Better how? He eats. He don't look so tired, and the house don't feel so empty. She paused. You're gonna stay, right? Past the week? Lydia's throat tightened. I don't know, sweetheart. That's up to your father. He likes you. Maisie, he does, I can tell. He's just bad at saying things. Before Lydia could respond, the door opened and Ethan walked in, bringing cold air and the smell of hay with him. He hung his coat on the peg, scrubbed his hands at the basin, and sat down without comment. Maisie served the stew, chattering about her day. Ethan listened, offering occasional nods or one-word responses. But Lydia noticed the way his posture had relaxed slightly, the way his eyes tracked his daughter's movements with quiet affection. After supper, while Maisie worked on her lessons at the table, Ethan lingered by the fire. Lydia cleaned the dishes, acutely aware of his presence, of the silence that had settled between them. She's right, you know, he said finally. Lydia turned. About what? It is better, since you came. She dried her hands slowly, unsure how to respond. The week's up tomorrow, Ethan continued, his gaze fixed on the flames. If you want to leave, I'll take you to town, get you a ticket east like I promised. And if I don't want to leave? He looked at her then, his gray eyes searching her face. Then I'd like you to stay. As hired help? As... He hesitated, choosing words carefully. As part of the household. Fair wages. Your own room. Meals. Maisie needs someone. And I need... He trailed off, then started again. I can't do this alone anymore. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was honest, and honesty was something Lydia had learned to value. All right, she said. I'll stay. Relief flickered across his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Good. Maisie looked up from her slate, grinning. Told you, she said to her father. Ethan shook his head, but there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Do your arithmetic. Already done. Then get ready for bed. The girl scampered off, and Lydia found herself alone with Ethan again. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. We'll work out wages tomorrow, Ethan said. Figure out what's fair. That's fine. He nodded, started to leave, then stopped. Lydia? Yes? Why'd you really stay? After you found out about the letter? She considered the question. Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's not the whole reason. No, it wasn't. She took a breath. Because Maisie asked me to, and no one had asked me for anything in a very long time. Understanding passed between them, unspoken but clear. Well, Ethan said quietly, I'm asking now. Stay. I already said I would. I know, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not just convenience. Something in her chest loosened, just a fraction. Thank you. He nodded once more and headed upstairs, leaving Lydia alone in the kitchen. She banked the fire, blew out the lamps, and made her way to her small room. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her, she realized something had shifted. She'd come here desperate and directionless, accepting shelter because there was no alternative. But somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this had stopped feeling like temporary refuge. It was starting to feel like home. The trip to town came 3 days later. Ethan drove the wagon, Lydia beside him, Maisie wedged between them with a list of supplies clutched in her hand. The girl kept up a steady stream of commentary, pointing out landmarks, telling stories, asking questions. Ethan answered patiently, more talkative with his daughter than Lydia had yet seen him. Coldwater appeared on the horizon, a cluster of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street. The town was bigger than Lydia had realized during her desperate vigil at the station. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a small hotel, a bank. People moved along the boardwalk, stopping to talk, conducting business. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop outside Henderson's general store. "Let me do the talking," Lydia said quietly as they climbed down. Ethan frowned. "It's my account." "I know, but if Henderson sees me reviewing the bills, he'll know someone's paying attention now. That'll matter more than anything you say." He considered this, then nodded. "All right." They walked into the store together, Maisie running ahead to examine a display of peppermint sticks. The interior was dim and crowded, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to harnesses to bolts of fabric. Behind the counter stood a heavy-set man with thinning hair and sharp eyes. "Cole," he said, his tone friendly enough. "Need supplies?" "Yeah." Ethan pulled out the list. "Usual order, plus some extra feed." Henderson scanned the list, nodding. "I'll get this together. Take about 20 minutes. "That's fine." As Henderson moved toward the back, Lydia stepped forward. "I'd like to review the bill before we settle the account." Henderson paused, looking at her for the first time. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And who might you be?" "Lydia Monroe. I'm managing Mr. Cole's household accounts." "That's so." Henderson's gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to her. "Cole's always settled his own bills before." "He still will. I'll just be verifying the charges first." Something cold passed over Henderson's face, quickly masked. "Nothing to verify. My prices are fair." "I'm sure they are, but I keep careful records, and I'd like to make sure everything matches." Henderson's jaw tightened. "You saying I'm cheating him?" "I'm saying I do my job thoroughly." Lydia kept her voice level, pleasant. "I'm sure you understand." The two of them stared at each other across the counter. Ethan stood silent beside her, his presence solid and steady. Finally, Henderson shrugged. "Suit yourself. Bill will be ready when the supplies are." He disappeared into the back room. Lydia let out a slow breath. "That went well," Ethan said dryly. "He knows we're watching now. That's what matters." 20 minutes later, Henderson returned with the supplies loaded and a handwritten bill. He slapped it on the counter with more force than necessary. Lydia picked it up, scanning the lines carefully. Flour, 10 pounds, $1. Sugar, 5 pounds, 70 cents. Coffee, 2 pounds, 90 cents. She cross-referenced each item against the list, checking quantities and prices. Then she found it. "This says 12 pounds of feed at $8, she said. "We ordered 10 pounds. Henderson didn't even glance at the paper. "12's what I got." "Then we'll take 10 and you'll adjust the price accordingly." "Already loaded it." "Then unload 2 pounds. Henderson's face reddened. "Now look here, Mr. Henderson." Lydia's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "We're happy to pay for what we ordered, but we won't pay for what we didn't. Adjust the bill, please." For a moment she thought he might argue, but Ethan shifted beside her and Henderson seemed to recalculate his position. "Fine," he muttered. He scratched out the line and rewrote it. $6.40. Lydia reviewed the rest of the bill, found no other discrepancies, and nodded. "That's acceptable." Ethan paid in cash. Henderson counted it slowly, his expression sour. As they loaded the wagon, Maisie appeared with a peppermint stick. "Can I get one, Daddy? Just one?" Ethan glanced at Lydia, something like amusement in his eyes. "Ask your accountant." Lydia pretended to consider. "I suppose we can allocate 5 cents for morale." Maisie beamed. Ethan paid for the candy and they climbed back into the wagon. As they pulled away from the store, Ethan said quietly, "You just made an enemy." "He was already stealing from you. He was already an enemy." "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment. You handled that well. Thank you. Where'd you learn to do that? Stand up to men like Henderson? Lydia watched the town recede behind them. Philadelphia boarding house. Landlady tried to charge me for damages I didn't cause. I learned fast that if you don't stand your ground, people will take everything you have. Ethan nodded slowly. Well, good thing you're on our side now. Our side. The word settled warm in her chest. Maisie sucked on her peppermint, legs swinging, perfectly content. And Lydia realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because someone had promised her a place, but because she'd earned it. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Lydia managed the household with quiet efficiency, transforming chaos into order one task at a time. The account books balanced. The pantry stayed stocked. Meals appeared on time, laundry got done, and the small repairs that had been neglected for months finally got attention. But it was more than just work. She learned the ranch's rhythms, when the chickens laid best, which cow was prone to mastitis, how to read the sky for incoming storms. She learned Ethan's silences, the difference between the quiet of exhaustion and the quiet of thought. She learned that Maisie was brilliant with numbers but struggled with reading, that she was terrified of thunder but fearless around horses, that she asked 1,000 questions because no one had answered them in 2 years. And slowly, carefully, Ethan began to talk. Not much, not easily, but in small moments, over coffee in the morning, during evening chores, on the porch after Maisie went to bed, he would offer pieces of himself. He told her about Sarah, how they'd met at a church social in Montana, how she'd agreed to marry him after knowing him 3 weeks, how she'd loved this land even when it was brutal, how she'd sung while she worked, how she'd made everything feel lighter just by being in it. She died in the winter, he said one night, his voice low. Fever came on fast. By the time I got the doctor out here, it was too late. He stared into his coffee. Maisie found her. I was out checking the stock. Came back and my daughter was sitting on the floor next to the bed, holding her mama's hand, trying to wake her up. Lydia's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. Still don't, half the time. Sarah always knew what Maisie needed, what to say, how to help. I'm just trying not to fail her. You're not failing her. She had to bribe a stranger to get someone to care about her. She didn't bribe me. She saw someone who needed help and decided to do something about it. That's not failure. That's what you taught her. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. You're good for her, he said quietly. For us. Lydia didn't trust herself to respond. She just nodded. But later, lying in her small room, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd set us, like she was part of something, like she'd stopped being temporary. Spring began to assert itself, and with it came new work. The garden needed planting, fences needed mending, cattle needed moving to higher pasture. Ethan hired 2-day laborers to help with the heavy work, and Lydia found herself cooking for 4 instead of 3, packing lunches, keeping coffee hot. One afternoon, while Ethan was out in the far pasture, a rider approached the house. Lydia was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see a man dismounting, well-dressed, clean-shaven, riding a horse too fine for ranch work. He moved with the easy confidence of someone used to being important. Afternoon, he called, tipping his hat. Mrs. Cole? Miss Monroe, Lydia corrected. I manage the household. His eyebrows rose. Ah. Is Mr. Cole available? He's working. Can I help you with something? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm Victor Hale. I own the bank in town. I'd like to speak with Cole about his loan. Lydia's stomach tightened. I wasn't aware Mr. Cole had a loan. Oh yes, $1,500 borrowed 2 years ago. Payments coming due next month. $1,500. Lydia's mind raced through the ledgers she'd memorized. There'd been no mention of a loan, no regular payments recorded. I'll let Mr. Cole know you stopped by, she said carefully. I'd prefer to speak with him directly. He'll be back before supper. You're welcome to wait, or you can return tomorrow. Hale studied her, his expression calculating. You're new here. I've been here a month. And you're managing the books? I am. Interesting.
He smiled again. Well, Miss Monroe, do make sure Cole understands the urgency. The bank has been patient, but patience has limits. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Lydia standing in the yard with wet laundry in her hands and dread settling in her chest. When Ethan came in that evening, she told him about the visit. His face went gray. He came here? Yes. Said a payment's due next month, $1,500. Ethan sank into a chair, rubbing his face. I didn't want you to know about that. Why not? Because it's my problem, my debt. If it affects the ranch, it affects the household accounts. That makes it my concern. She sat across from him. Tell me about the loan. He was quiet for a long moment.
Took it out right after Sarah died. Needed money for the funeral, for medicine I'd bought trying to save her, for everything. Hale said I could pay it back over 3 years, small amounts, manageable. And have you been paying? When I could, but this winter was hard. Lost cattle, prices dropped. I've missed the last 4 months. Does he charge interest? Ethan's jaw tightened. 20%. Lydia's breath caught. 20% was predatory. That can't be legal. It's what I signed. She stood, pacing. $1,500 at 20% over 2 years. The numbers spun through her head. How much have you paid so far? About $600. And how much does he say you still owe? $1,800. Lydia stopped. That's not possible. Even with interest, she grabbed the ledgers, started calculating. You should owe maybe $1,200 at most. He's charging you for missed payments like they're new loans. Ethan looked up, hope and anger warring on his face. Are you sure? The math doesn't lie. She showed him the numbers, walking him through it. He's cheating you, just like Henderson. What do I do? We need to see the original contract, find out exactly what you agreed to. It's at the bank? Then we go to the bank. She met his eyes. Tomorrow, first thing. Ethan nodded slowly, then he reached across the table and took her hand, just for a moment, just long enough to squeeze it once. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said quietly. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. You'd figure it out. You always have. Maybe, but I'm glad I don't have to. He released her hand and stood, heading outside. Lydia sat alone in the quiet kitchen, staring at the ledgers, at the numbers that told the story of a man barely holding on. And she made a decision. She'd come to this ranch because she had nowhere else to go. She'd stayed because she needed the work. But if Victor Hale thought he could steal this family's future, he was about to learn what happened when you cornered someone who'd already lost everything once. Lydia Monroe had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. They rode into Coldwater at first light, leaving Maisie with the neighbor woman who helped with schooling when needed. The town was just waking, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. But Lydia barely noticed. Her mind was fixed on the numbers she'd calculated and recalculated late into the night, on the contract that would either prove her right or reveal how little power they actually had. Ethan was quiet beside her, his jaw set in that way she'd learned meant he was working through something he didn't want to say aloud. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been shame. If this goes bad, if Hale calls the loan, he won't. You don't know that. No, Lydia admitted, but I know the numbers, and numbers don't lie even when people do. The bank sat at the corner of Main Street and First, a 2-story brick building that announced its permanence in a town made mostly of wood. Victor Hale's name was painted in gold letters across the window. Ethan tied the horses and they walked inside together, Lydia's heart beating hard against her ribs. The interior was all dark wood and polished brass, designed to impress and intimidate. A young clerk looked up from his desk, recognition flickering across his face when he saw Ethan. Mr. Cole, Mr. Hale isn't expecting you. Don't need an appointment to discuss my own loan, Ethan said evenly. The clerk hesitated, then disappeared through a door at the back. Lydia used the moment to study the office, noting the expensive furnishings, the locked cabinets along the wall, the safe visible through the partially open door to Hale's private office. Victor Hale emerged a moment later, his smile professional and empty. Cole, Miss Monroe, what a pleasant surprise. Need to see my loan contract, Ethan said without preamble. Of course, though I'm not sure what questions you might have.
Everything's quite straightforward.
Hale moved to one of the cabinets, unlocked it, and withdrew a folder. He laid it on the clerk's desk, opening it to reveal a single page covered in dense text. Lydia stepped forward, scanning the document. Standard loan agreement, principal amount $1,500, term of 3 years, payment schedule. She stopped. There it was. 20% interest compounded monthly. And below that, in smaller text, failure to make scheduled payment will result in penalty fee of $50 and immediate compounding of all outstanding interest. Her stomach dropped. This says you charge a $50 penalty for each missed payment. That's correct. And you compound the interest immediately? Standard practice for delinquent accounts. Hale's smile never wavered. It protects the bank's investment. Lydia pulled out the small notebook where she'd copied her calculations. By my count, Mr. Cole has missed 4 payments. That's $200 in penalties. But you're claiming he owes $1,800 on a loan that should have a remaining principal of $900. Your math doesn't account for the compounding. Actually, it does. Even with monthly compounding and the penalties, the total should be approximately $1,300. You're charging him $500 more than the contract allows. Hale's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Miss Monroe. Banking calculations are complex. I'm not mistaken. She kept her voice level, professional. I've reviewed the contract. I've done the math. Unless you can show me line by line how you arrived at 1,800, I have to conclude there's been an error. An error. Hale's tone made it clear what he thought of that suggestion. Yes, an error, which I'm sure you'll want to correct immediately. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clerk pretended to be very interested in his ledger. Ethan stood silent, his presence solid at Lydia's shoulder. Hale closed the folder carefully. Miss Monroe, I appreciate your enthusiasm for household management, but banking is a complicated business. Perhaps it would be better if you left these matters to the men who understand them. The condescension was meant to sting, and it did. But Lydia had heard worse in Philadelphia from landlords and shopkeepers and men who assumed a woman alone was either stupid or desperate. She'd learned to swallow the anger and use it as fuel. I understand numbers perfectly well, Mr. Hale, and these numbers don't add up. Are you calling me a thief? I'm saying there's a discrepancy that needs to be resolved. Hale's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ethan. Cole, you're going to let this woman speak for you? Ethan's voice was quiet, but absolutely steady. She's right. I want to see your calculations. I don't have to show you anything. The debt is what I say it is. Then we'll take this to Judge Morrison, Lydia said. Let him review the contract and your accounting. It was a bluff. She had no idea if the judge would even hear such a case, but Hale's face darkened and she knew she'd hit something. You're making a mistake, he said softly. No, I'm correcting one. Lydia met his gaze without flinching. We'll pay what's actually owed according to the contract. $1,300. You'll have it in full by the due date next month. And if you don't? We will. Hale stared at her for a long moment, and Lydia saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He could push this, could call the loan now, could force them into a legal fight they might not win, but that would draw attention, might bring scrutiny he didn't want. Finally, he smiled again, and it was worse than his anger. Very well, $1,300, due in 30 days. Not a dollar less, not a day late. He leaned forward slightly. But Miss Monroe, you should be careful. This is a small town. People talk, and strangers who cause trouble tend not to last long. The threat was barely veiled. Lydia felt Ethan tense beside her. We're not looking for trouble, she said evenly. Just fairness. Of course. Hale straightened, already dismissing them. Good day. They walked out into the bright morning, Lydia's legs shaking so badly she had to concentrate on each step. Ethan didn't speak until they'd reached the wagon. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen, he said. Maybe both. Lydia leaned against the wagon, breathing hard. The enormity of what she'd just done was starting to settle in. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful man in Coldwater. You shouldn't have done that. Yes, I should have. He was stealing from you. And now he's going to come after you. Let him try. But her voice shook, betraying the fear underneath the bravado. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, $1,300 in 30 days. Where the hell am I going to get that kind of money? Lydia had been thinking about that all night. The cattle. If we sell now, spring prices are terrible. I'd lose money. Then we wait until the fall market. Loans due in 30 days, not 6 months. I know. Lydia took a breath. I have some money, not much, but no. Ethan, no. His voice was firm. This is my debt. I'm not taking your money. It's not charity. It's an investment in the ranch, in... She stopped, not quite ready to finish that sentence, but Ethan heard it anyway. His expression softened slightly. In us? Maybe. He looked away toward the mountains visible beyond the town. I won't let you risk everything you have for my mistakes. What if I want to? Why would you want to? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. Lydia thought about the past month, about the rhythm they'd fallen into, about Maisie's laughter and the way Ethan's rare smiles changed his whole face, about how she'd stopped thinking of the ranch as temporary shelter and started thinking of it as something else entirely. Because this is the first place that's felt like it might be mine, she said quietly, and I'm tired of losing things. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something shift in his eyes. Not love. That would be too simple, too soon. But recognition, maybe. Understanding. We'll figure it out, he said finally. Together. Together, she echoed. They climbed into the wagon and started the long ride home, neither of them speaking, both of them thinking about the promise they'd just made and the storm they could feel building on the horizon. The next week brought its own troubles. Henderson raised his prices another 10%, citing supply shortages that Lydia suspected were fictional. The day laborers Ethan had hired both quit suddenly, claiming they'd found better work, though one of them looked nervous when he said it. And Maisie came home from school upset because a group of girls had excluded her from their game, whispering about her father's debts and the strange woman living in their house. They said, "You're not really my mama," Maisie told Lydia that evening, her voice small. They said you're just hired help and you'll leave like everyone else. Lydia's heart broke a little. She knelt down so they were eye level. What do you think? I think you're not my mama, but I think maybe you could be something else, something just as good. Like what? Maisie thought about it seriously. Like family, the kind you choose. Lydia had to swallow hard before she could speak. I think that sounds perfect. So you're staying? For real? For real. Maisie threw her arms around Lydia's neck, and Lydia held her tight, thinking about how much this child had already lost, and how determined she was to make sure she didn't lose anything else. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Lydia sat at the kitchen table going over the numbers again. $1,300. They had maybe $400 in savings. The cattle wouldn't bring enough at current prices. She had $200 in a bank account in Philadelphia, her entire inheritance from her mother, saved over years of careful scrimp and sacrifice. She'd been planning to use it to start over if the ranch didn't work out, to buy a ticket somewhere new, to have something to fall back on. But she was done running, done starting over, done living life as a series of temporary measures and contingency plans. She was going to bet everything on this. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Ethan came in from checking the stock, his hair damp from washing at the pump, his sleeves rolled up despite the cool night air. Still working? He asked, trying to make the impossible possible. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Any luck? Some. If we sell the yearling calves now instead of waiting, that's maybe 300. My savings in Philadelphia is 200. Your savings here is 400. That's 900. We're still 400 short. I could ask my brother for a loan. Would he have it? Ethan's expression darkened. Maybe, but he'd want something in return. He always does. What kind of something? Control, a say in how I run the ranch. He's been trying to buy me out for years, thinks I'm wasting good land. Lydia tapped her pencil against the ledger. What about taking on a partner? Someone who'd invest in exchange for a percentage of the profits. Who'd want to partner with a ranch that's barely breaking even? Someone who sees the potential. The land is good, Ethan. The location is solid. You've just been doing it alone for too long. He was quiet, staring into his coffee. There might be one person. Who? James Thornton. Runs the lumber mill east of here. His son wants to start ranching but doesn't have the experience. Thornton approached me last year about some kind of arrangement, but I turned him down. Why? Pride, mostly. Didn't want to admit I needed help. He looked at her. But things have changed. Yes, Lydia said softly. They have. The next day, Ethan rode out to the lumber mill while Lydia stayed behind to manage the ranch work. She spent the morning in the garden, turning soil, planning what to plant. It was physical work that let her mind wander, and she found herself thinking about futures, not just the immediate crisis of the loan, but what came after. If they survived this, what then? She'd stay on as household manager, save her wages, build a life here. But what kind of life? She wasn't Ethan's wife, wasn't Maisie's mother. She was something in between, undefined and uncertain, and increasingly she wanted more. The thought scared her. She'd come west expecting nothing, and that had made it safe. But now she was starting to want things, stability, belonging, maybe even love. And wanting things meant you could lose them. She was still working when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 4 riders crested the hill, moving fast. Something in the way they rode made her stomach clench. She dropped her trowel and started toward the house, but they were already there, surrounding her. Victor Hale dismounted smoothly, his smile as cold as his eyes. The 3 men with him stayed on their horses, hard-looking men with guns on their hips. Miss Monroe, I don't believe we finished our conversation. Lydia's mouth went dry. I think we did. No, see, I've been thinking about your accusations, about you calling me a cheat in front of my clerk, about you threatening to involve the judge. He stepped closer. That kind of talk is dangerous. It's also true. Truth is what people believe, and in this town, people believe me. He glanced toward the house. Cole here? No. Pity. I was hoping to discuss my concerns with him directly, about the company he keeps, about letting an unmarried woman live under his roof. People are starting to talk, starting to wonder what kind of household he's running. The implication was clear and vile. Lydia felt rage burn through her fear. Get off this property. I'm not done. Yes, you are. Hale's expression hardened. You need to understand something, Miss Monroe. You're nobody. You came here chasing a man who didn't exist. You have no standing, no reputation, no protection. You're only here because Cole's too soft-hearted to throw you out. That's not true, isn't it? You think he cares about you. You're convenient, that's all. Help around the house, someone to warm his bed eventually. But you're not Sarah. You'll never be Sarah. The words hit harder than they should have, finding the insecurities she'd been trying to ignore. And when he realizes that, Hale continued, his voice soft and poisonous, when he gets tired of you or finds someone better, you'll be right back where you started, alone, broke, desperate. He leaned in close enough that she could smell tobacco on his breath. So here's my advice. Take whatever money you've saved and buy yourself a ticket east. Leave before you get hurt. No. You're making a mistake. I'm making a choice. There's a difference. Hale's jaw clenched. For a moment, Lydia thought he might actually strike her, but then he smiled again, stepping back. We'll see how long that choice lasts. He mounted his horse. One more thing. That loan? I'm calling it. Due immediately. Full amount. $1,800. You can't. The contract says 30 days. Contract also says I can call it immediately if I judge the borrower to be acting in bad faith. And letting a woman of questionable character manage my money? That's bad faith. You bastard. Careful, Miss Monroe. Ladies don't use that kind of language. He tipped his hat mockingly. You have 3 days. After that, I seize the ranch. They rode off, leaving Lydia shaking with fury and fear in equal measure. 3 days. It was impossible. Even if Ethan closed the deal with Thornton, even if they sold everything they had, they couldn't raise $1,800 in 3 days. Hale knew it.
That's why he was doing it.
She was still standing there when Ethan returned an hour later, his face drawn with exhaustion. He took one look at her and his expression darkened. What happened? She told him everything, Hale's threats, his accusations, the loan being called. With each word, Ethan's face grew harder, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "He threatened you." "It doesn't matter." "It matters." He turned toward the house. "I'm going to town." "Ethan, no. He doesn't get to come to my home and threaten." "That's exactly what he wants." Lydia grabbed his arm. "He wants you angry, wants you to do something stupid so he can claim you're dangerous, unstable, so he can take everything." "So I'm supposed to do nothing?" "No, you're supposed to be smart." She forced herself to calm down, to think. "We can't win by fighting him directly, but maybe we can outmaneuver him." "How?" "I don't know yet. But 3 days is 3 days. A lot can happen in 3 days." Ethan stared at her, something fierce and protective burning in his eyes. "He had no right to talk to you that way." "No, he didn't. But I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to step back, and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hand. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "Good thing you need stubborn right now." His thumb brushed her cheek, and the tenderness of the gesture nearly undid her. "It's not just about the ranch anymore," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Her heart hammered. "What is it about?" "You, staying, being part of this." He swallowed hard. "Being part of us." Before she could respond, before she could process what he was saying, Maisie's voice called from inside the house. "Daddy? Miss Lydia? I'm hungry." The moment broke. Ethan dropped his hand, stepped back. But something had shifted between them, some line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. "We should feed her," Lydia said, her voice unsteady. "Yeah." He didn't move. "Lydia?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens, I want you to know, you being here, it's the best thing that's happened to us in a long time." She couldn't find words, could only nod. They went inside together, and Lydia started supper with hands that trembled slightly. Not from fear this time, but from something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Lydia and Ethan sat at the table making lists, running calculations, searching for solutions that didn't exist. They needed a miracle. And miracles, Lydia knew, rarely came when you needed them most. But she'd come west on nothing but hope and found a family. Maybe hope would be enough one more time. The miracle came from an unexpected direction. Lydia was up before dawn, staring at columns of numbers that refused to add up to salvation when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find James Thornton standing on the porch, hat in hand, his weathered face grave in the pre-dawn light. "Mrs. Cole around?" he asked. "I'm not. I manage the household." "Mr. Cole is still sleeping." "Actually, I'm up." Ethan appeared behind her, pulling on his shirt. "Thornton, didn't expect you this early." "Got news that won't wait." Thornton glanced at Lydia. "Mind if I come in?" They sat at the kitchen table while Lydia made coffee, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. Thornton had to be here about the partnership, but whether it was good news or bad, she couldn't tell from his expression. "I talked to my son about your offer," Thornton said. "He's interested, real interested, wants to learn the cattle business, willing to work for it." "That's good," Ethan said carefully. "But I heard something in town yesterday that changes things." Thornton accepted the coffee Lydia offered with a nod of thanks. "Heard Hale called your loan, gave you 3 days." Ethan's jaw tightened. Word travels fast. "Small town, people talk." Thornton took a sip. "Also heard why he called it? Something about Miss Monroe here questioning his accounting. She was right to question it. He was cheating me. Don't doubt it. Hale's been running his own game in this valley for years. Most folks are too scared to call him on it." Thornton looked at Lydia with something like respect. "Takes guts to stand up to a man like that." "Or stupidity," Lydia said quietly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Thornton set down his cup. "Here's my situation. I got the money to invest in this ranch. Could probably even cover most of what you owe Hale. But I'm not doing it if he's just going to turn around and seize the property anyway. Need to know this land's secure before I put my money in it. It's not secure, Ethan said bluntly. Not with 3 days to raise $1,800. What if we had proof Hale's been doctoring the books? Not just on your loan, but others. Lydia leaned forward. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I know a man who might. Thornton shifted in his chair. Sam Garrett. Used to work as Hale's clerk before the current one. Got fired about 6 months back, supposedly for drinking, but Sam told me it was because he questioned some numbers that didn't add up. Hale needed him gone before he figured out the whole scheme. Where's Garrett now? Ethan asked. Working at the livery stable. Barely making enough to eat. But he's sober, angry, and he kept copies of things before Hale fired him. Things that might show a pattern. Lydia's heart started to beat faster. If we could prove Hale's been systematically defrauding borrowers, Judge Morrison would have to investigate, Thornton finished. Might even void the loans entirely if they were based on fraudulent calculations. That's a lot of maybes, Ethan said. It is, but it's more than you had an hour ago. Thornton stood. I'll talk to Sam, see what he's got. You two work on getting the judge to listen. We move fast enough, we might be able to stop Hale before he seizes this place. After Thornton left, Lydia and Ethan sat in silence, the weight of possibility and risk pressing down on them. This could work, Lydia said finally. Or it could make everything worse. If we accuse Hale publicly and can't prove it, then we're no worse off than we are now. He's already trying to destroy us. Ethan looked at her, his gray eyes searching. Why are you doing this? You could walk away, take your money and start over somewhere safe. I don't want safe. I want this. She gestured at the kitchen, the house, the life they'd been building. I want us. The words hung in the air between them, too honest, too raw. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I can't ask you to risk everything for this, he said, his back to her. You're not asking, I'm choosing. What if we lose? What if we win? He turned, and the look on his face made her breath catch. If we win, if we keep this place, what then? What are we to each other? It was the question they'd been dancing around for weeks. Lydia stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. I don't know, she admitted, but I know I want the chance to find out. Ethan reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His palm was rough, scarred from years of work, and it felt like the most honest thing she'd ever touched. I love Sarah, he said quietly. Still do in a way, but she's gone, and I'm tired of living like I'm gone too. You're not gone. You're right here. So are you. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. And I want you to stay, not as hired help, not as someone passing through, as, he struggled for the words, as someone who belongs here, with us, with me. Lydia's throat tightened. That's what I want too. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his gaze dropping to her lips. But then Maisie's footsteps sounded on the stairs, and they stepped apart, the moment suspended, unfinished. Morning, Maisie announced, rubbing her eyes. Why's everyone up so early? We've got work to do, Ethan said. Important work. What kind? Lydia and Ethan exchanged a look. Then Lydia knelt down beside the girl. The kind where we fight for what's ours. Maisie's eyes went wide and serious. Can I help? Actually, Lydia said, we might need you to be very brave today. Think you can do that? I can be brave. Good. Because we're going to need all the brave we can get. They made their plans over breakfast. Ethan would ride to the livery stable, talk to Sam Garrett, see what documentation he had. Lydia would go to Judge Morrison's office, request an emergency hearing. It was a risk. Morrison might side with Hale, might refuse to hear them at all, but it was the only legal avenue they had. What about me? Maisie asked. You're going to school like normal, Ethan said. And you're going to be calm and careful. If anyone asks about your daddy or Miss Lydia, you tell them everything's fine. But that's lying. It's strategy, Lydia corrected gently. Sometimes you don't show your hand until you're ready to play it. Maisie considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, I can do strategy. They left together, Ethan dropping Maisie at school before heading to the livery, Lydia riding alone into town. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of spring day that promised warmth later but held on to winter's edge for now. Lydia tried to rehearse what she'd say to the judge, but her mind kept skittering away, returning to Ethan's words, to the feel of his hand in hers, to the dangerous hope building in her chest. She'd come west expecting nothing and found everything. Now she had to fight to keep it. Judge Morrison's office was above the general store, accessible by an outside staircase that creaked ominously under her weight. She knocked, her heart pounding, and heard a gruff voice call, "It's open!" The judge was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with white hair and sharp blue eyes that assessed her over wire-rimmed spectacles. His desk was buried in papers, law books stacked on every available surface. "Help you, miss?" "My name is Lydia Monroe. I work for Ethan Cole managing his household and accounts." She kept her voice steady. "I need to request an emergency hearing regarding a loan dispute with Victor Hale." Morrison's expression didn't change. Hale already filed notice that he's calling the loan. That's within his rights, per the contract. The contract Cole signed, yes, but the amount Hale's claiming is fraudulent. We can prove it. Can you now? Morrison leaned back in his chair, but that's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Hale's trying to seize the ranch in 3 days based on calculations that don't match the actual contract terms. You've reviewed the contract? Yes, and done the math. Hale's charging interest on penalties, compounding incorrectly, and adding fees that aren't specified anywhere in the agreement. Morrison studied her for a long moment. You're not from around here. No, sir. Philadelphia originally. And you just happened to end up managing Cole's accounts? She heard the skepticism in his voice and knew she was walking a razor's edge. Tell too much and she'd sound desperate, unreliable. Tell too little and he'd dismiss her. I came west for a marriage that turned out to be fraudulent, she said simply. Mr. Cole needed help with his household after his wife died. I needed work. It's been mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. Morrison's mouth twitched. Might have been the start of a smile. And now you're accusing the town's most prominent banker of fraud to protect this mutually beneficial arrangement. I'm accusing him of fraud because he's committing fraud. The arrangement is irrelevant. Is it? Morrison pulled out a file, flipped it open. I've known Victor Hale for 15 years. He served on the town council, donated to the church, funded the new schoolhouse. You've been here what? A month? 5 weeks? 5 weeks. And you want me to believe you've uncovered a pattern of criminal activity that no one else has noticed? Lydia took a breath. This was the moment. Either Morrison was honest enough to listen, or he was in Hale's pocket already. Judge Morrison, how many ranchers have lost their land to Hale in the past 5 years? His eyes narrowed. That's public record, maybe a dozen. And how many of those foreclosures came after the ranchers fell behind on loan payments? Most of them. It's how lending works. And did any of those ranchers ever claim the numbers didn't match? That they were being overcharged? Morrison was quiet for a moment. One or two might have mentioned something. What happened to those complaints? Nothing. Hale showed the contracts. Everything was in writing. Just like with Mr. Cole's loan. Everything in writing. Everything legal. Lydia leaned forward. Except the math doesn't work. And I'm betting if you looked at those other foreclosures, the math wouldn't work there either. Morrison's expression gave nothing away. That's speculation. It's a pattern, and we have someone who can testify to it. Sam Garrett, Hale's former clerk. Garrett's a drunk. Garrett got fired for questioning Hale's accounting. There's a difference. Morrison stood, walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Lydia watched his back, trying to read his silence. Was he considering her claims or planning how to dismiss them? Finally, he turned. You understand what you're asking? If I grant a hearing and you can't prove fraud, Hale will own you. He'll sue for defamation. He'll make sure you never work in this valley again. Cole will lose his ranch and his reputation. That little girl of his will pay the price. I understand. And you're willing to risk that? Lydia thought about Maisie's fierce loyalty, about Ethan's quiet strength,
about the life they'd been building together in that weathered ranch house, about the choice she'd made weeks ago to stay, to fight, to bet everything on belonging. "Yes," she said. "I am." Morrison studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly.
Emergency hearing day after tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Hale gets formal notice today, so he'll have time to prepare his defense. He met her eyes. "You better be right about this, Miss Monroe." "I am." "We'll see." Lydia left the judge's office with her knees shaking, barely able to believe what she'd just done. They had a hearing. They had a chance. But they also had less than 48 hours to build a case that could stand against the most powerful man in Coldwater. She found Ethan at the livery stable, deep in conversation with a thin man in his 40s with haunted eyes and ink-stained fingers. Sam Garrett looked like someone who'd lost everything and was still waiting for the final blow. "Miss Monroe," Ethan said, "Sam's been telling me about the records he kept." Garrett pulled out a worn satchel, extracted several notebooks. "I knew something was wrong. Numbers kept changing between when I'd write them down and when they'd appear in the official ledgers. Small differences at first, just a few dollars here and there, but it added up." "How much are we talking about?" Lydia asked. "Over 2 years? Maybe $10,000 across all the accounts I could track." Garrett's hand shook slightly as he turned pages. "See here. This loan to the Peterson Ranch. Principal was $800, interest rate 15%. By my calculations, after 18 months they should have owed about $950, but Hale claimed they owed $1,400. When I questioned it, he said I'd made errors in the original entry." "But you kept your records." "I kept everything. Figured eventually someone would need to see the truth." He looked at Ethan. "Your loan's not the only one he's doctored. There's at least 8 others I can document." Lydia felt hope surge through her. "Will you testify? At the hearing day after tomorrow?" Garrett paled. "Testify? In court? We need someone who understands the bookkeeping, who can explain the discrepancies."
"He'll destroy me. I've got nothing left, but he'll find a way." "He's already destroyed you," Ethan said quietly. "Question is whether you let him keep doing it to others." The two men stared at each other. Garrett's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I've got a daughter," he said finally. "Lives back east with her mother. Haven't been able to send money in over a year because Hale made sure no one in this valley would hire me for bookkeeping. Said I was incompetent, a drunk." His voice hardened. "I stopped drinking 6 months ago. Been sober every day since, but I'm still paying for sins I didn't commit while he gets richer off other people's suffering." "So help us stop him," Lydia said. Garrett looked down at his notebooks, at the careful documentation of wrongs no one had believed. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll testify." They spent the rest of the day at the ranch, going through Garrett's records, cross-referencing them with Ethan's contract, building the case. Maisie came home from school and immediately sensed the tension, growing quiet and watchful. She did her lessons without being asked, helped with supper without complaint, and when Ethan finally sent her to bed, she hugged them both tight. "We're going to be okay, right?" she whispered to Lydia. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." "Promise?" Lydia thought about all the promises that had been broken in this child's short life. She wouldn't add another one unless she meant it absolutely. "I promise we'll fight for it with everything we have," she said carefully. "And sometimes that's enough." Maisie nodded against her shoulder, accepting the honesty even if it wasn't the certainty she craved. After the girl was asleep, Lydia and Ethan sat at the table surrounded by papers, their coffee long gone cold. It was past midnight and exhaustion pulled at them both, but neither wanted to stop. Stopping meant thinking about what came next, about the enormous risk they were taking. "You should sleep," Ethan said finally. "So should you." "Can't. Too much in my head." Lydia understood. Her own mind was spinning, running through arguments and counter-arguments, trying to anticipate every move Hale might make. "Ethan?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Earlier, you said you wanted me to stay, as someone who belongs here." She met his eyes. "Did you mean that?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Then he stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. "I meant it," he said. "I know this isn't how things usually work. I know there's been no courtship, no proper—" He stopped, frustrated with his own words.
I'm not good at this. Sarah always said I had all the romance of a fence post. Despite everything, Lydia smiled. I don't need romance. What do you need? Honesty, partnership, someone who sees me as an equal. That's all I know how to offer. He took her hand, the gesture already familiar. I can't promise you ease or comfort. This life is hard. The ranch barely makes enough to keep us fed. Winters are brutal, and now we've made an enemy who wants to destroy us. I know all that. But if we get through this, if we keep this place, I want to build something real with you. Not just a household arrangement, not just... He struggled again, then gave up on eloquence. I want you to be my wife. Lydia's breath caught. It wasn't a proposal, not quite. More like a statement of intent, a promise of possibility. I want that too, she whispered. Yeah? Yeah. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face, and Lydia saw the man he must have been before grief hollowed him out. Then we better win this fight. We will. You sound certain. I am, because we're not alone anymore, and that makes us stronger than Hale realizes. Ethan stood, pulling her up with him. For a moment they just stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other in the flickering lamplight. Then he leaned forward and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we prepare. Day after, we fight. Lydia nodded, but before she could pull away, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. Thank you. For what? For giving me a reason to stay. His arms came around her then, holding her close. She felt his heart beating against her own, steady and strong, and let herself believe, just for this moment, that everything would be all right. They stood like that for a long time, taking comfort from each other's presence, gathering strength for the battle ahead. When they finally separated and went to their separate rooms, Lydia lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that needed to happen in the next 48 hours. They had to finish building the case, had to make sure Garrett stayed sober and steady, had to prepare for every argument Hale might make. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something that felt almost like joy. She'd come west chasing a lie and found truth instead. She'd expected nothing and received everything. And now, on the eve of the biggest fight of her life, she finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not safety, not security, not even love, though that was growing between them like something inevitable. What she'd found was agency, choice, the power to stand up and say, this is mine, this is worth fighting for, and I will not let it be taken from me. Tomorrow they would face Hale in court. They would present their evidence, make their case, and trust that justice would prevail. But whatever happened, Lydia knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being the woman who waited on train platforms for men who never came. She was done being powerless. From now on, she fought for what was hers, and heaven help anyone who tried to stop her. The morning of the hearing arrived with unseasonable cold, frost coating the windows and making the floorboards creak with every step. Lydia woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves, and found Ethan already in the kitchen stoking the fire. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. He shook his head. Kept running through everything in my head. What Hale might say. What we might have missed. We've done everything we can. Doesn't feel like enough. Lydia crossed to him, placed her hand on his arm. It has to be. They prepared in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them both. Maisie appeared dressed for school, her face pale but determined. I want to come, she said, to the hearing. Sweetheart, you should be in school, Ethan started. This is about our home, our family. I should be there. Ethan looked at Lydia, uncertain. She knelt down in front of Maisie, searching the girl's serious dark eyes. It might be hard to hear, Lydia said gently. Mr. Hale might say things that aren't true, things meant to hurt us. I know, but I'm not scared. Maisie lifted her chin. You taught me to be brave. Let me show you I learned. Lydia felt her throat tighten. She looked up at Ethan, who nodded slowly. All right, he said. You can come, but you stay quiet unless the judge asks you something directly. Understood? Yes, Daddy. They arrived at the courthouse an hour early.
The building was modest, just a large room with benches for observers and a raised platform where Judge Morrison would preside. Sam Garrett was already there, clutching his satchel of notebooks, looking like he might be sick. Lydia sat beside him while Ethan settled Maisie in the front row. "You all right?" Lydia asked quietly. Garrett's hands trembled. "Hale's going to tear me apart." "Only if you let him. You know the truth. Just tell it clearly and let the numbers speak for themselves." "What if Morrison doesn't believe me?" "Then we've lost nothing we wouldn't have lost anyway." She met his eyes. "But if he does believe you, we might save a dozen families from what Hale's been doing." Garrett nodded, though he still looked terrified. Lydia couldn't blame him. They were going up against the most powerful man in the valley, with nothing but math and testimony from a disgraced clerk. It should have felt impossible. But as people began filtering into the courtroom, ranchers, shopkeepers, folks who'd heard about the hearing through the town's efficient gossip network, Lydia noticed something. They weren't all there to support Hale. Some of them looked curious, others looked hopeful. A few looked angry in a way that suggested they had their own grievances with the banker. Victor Hale arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, flanked by a lawyer from Cheyenne in an expensive suit. Hale wore his usual confident smile, nodding to people as he took his seat. He glanced at Lydia once, his expression conveying absolute certainty that she was about to be humiliated. She stared back without flinching. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. He settled behind his desk, surveyed the crowded room with raised eyebrows, and banged his gavel once. "Court is in session. We're here regarding an emergency petition filed by Miss Lydia Monroe on behalf of Mr. Ethan Cole, contesting the terms and calculations of a loan held by Coldwater Bank, Mr. Victor Hale, presiding officer." Morrison looked at Lydia. "Miss Monroe, you're representing Mr. Cole." Lydia stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand you're not a lawyer?" "I do, but the math doesn't require legal expertise." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Hale's lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Miss Monroe has no standing to represent—" "This is an emergency hearing, not a trial," Morrison interrupted. "I'll allow it. Proceed, Miss Monroe." Lydia's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. "Your Honor, Mr. Cole borrowed $1,500 from Coldwater Bank 2 years ago at 20% interest, to be repaid over 3 years. According to the contract, he's made regular payments totaling $600. Mr. Hale claims the remaining balance is $1,800. We contest this amount as fraudulent." "Fraudulent is a strong word," Hale's lawyer said. "My client's calculations are based on the standard practices of compound interest and late payment penalties clearly outlined in the contract Mr. Cole signed." "May I approach with evidence?" Lydia asked. Morrison nodded. She walked forward with her carefully prepared ledger, laying it open on his desk. "This shows the original loan terms. Principal of $1,500, interest of 20% compounded monthly. Over 2 years with $600 paid, the remaining balance should be approximately $1,200, not $1,800. The lawyer stepped forward. "Your Honor, Miss Monroe's calculations fail to account for the penalties incurred by Mr. Cole's missed payments. 4 months at $50 per missed payment equals $200 in penalties, plus the compounding effect on the outstanding interest, which still doesn't equal $600 in additional charges," Lydia interrupted. "Even accounting for every penalty in the contract, the maximum Mr. Cole could owe is $1,300. Mr. Hale is charging $500 that appears nowhere in the agreement." Morrison studied the ledger, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hale, do you have documentation supporting your calculations?" Hale stood, radiating calm authority. "Of course, Your Honor. My clerk can provide the complete accounting." He gestured, and his current clerk, a nervous young man, hurried forward with a different ledger. Morrison compared the 2 documents, frowning. "These don't match." "Because Miss Monroe's calculations are amateur and incomplete," Hale said smoothly. "She lacks the expertise to properly account for the complexities of compound interest over an extended default period." "I have a degree in mathematics from the Philadelphia School for Women," Lydia said quietly. The lie came easily, born of desperation. "I've been keeping accounts for businesses since I was 18. The math isn't complex. It's wrong." Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. He turned to Hale's clerk.
Walk me through your calculations, line by line. The young man fumbled, looking to Hale for guidance. Hale's confident expression flickered just for a moment. Your Honor, this is an unnecessary exercise, the lawyer interjected. The contract is clear. The contract is clear, Morrison agreed. What's not clear is how we got from 1200 to 1800. I want to see the math. The clerk began explaining, his voice shaking. But as he went through the numbers, Lydia saw it. The moment where he added a fee that wasn't in the contract, where he compounded interest on a penalty rather than the principal. Morrison saw it too. Stop, the judge said. What's this charge here? Processing fee for late payment? It's standard. Is it in the contract? Silence. Answer the question. The clerk looked at Hale, then down. No, sir. Morrison leaned back, his expression hardening. Miss Monroe, you said you had additional evidence. Present it. This was the moment. Lydia gestured to Sam Garrett, who stood on shaking legs and approached with his satchel. Your Honor, this is Samuel Garrett, former clerk for Coldwater Bank. He has documentation showing a pattern of similar discrepancies across multiple loans. Hale's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, mister! Garrett was terminated for incompetence and drinking. I was terminated for questioning the same kind of fraudulent accounting we're seeing here, Garrett said, his voice stronger than Lydia expected. And I've been sober for 6 months, had to be, to make sure I wasn't imagining what I saw. Morrison gestured for him to continue. Garrett opened his notebooks, hands steadier now. I kept duplicate records of every loan I processed during my 2 years at the bank. Not because I suspected anything at first, but because I was trying to learn the business properly. When I started noticing discrepancies between my records and the official ledgers, I began documenting them systematically. He laid out page after page, the Peterson loan, the Williams loan, the Martinez loan. Each one showed the same pattern, fees added that weren't in contracts, interest compounded incorrectly, penalties that multiplied beyond what the terms allowed. Over the 8 loans I was able to fully document, the total excess charges amount to approximately $9,000, Garrett said. When I brought this to Mr. Hale's attention, he told me I'd made errors in my original entries. When I insisted my records were correct, he fired me and spread word that I was unreliable. These are the fabrications of a disgruntled employee, Hale's lawyer said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Morrison ignored him, studying the notebooks. These are detailed, dated, cross-referenced. He looked at Hale. Do you have corresponding records that dispute these figures? Your Honor, I maintain dozens of loans. I can't be expected to remember the specific details of calculations made 2 years ago, but you're expecting Mr. Cole to pay based on those calculations. Morrison's voice was sharp. You're about to seize his ranch based on numbers you can't explain or defend. Hale's composure finally cracked. This is a conspiracy. A desperate attempt by a failed rancher and he looked at Lydia with pure venom. His opportunistic whore to avoid paying legitimate debts. The courtroom erupted. Ethan lunged to his feet, his face dark with rage. Morrison's gavel came down like thunder. Order! Mr. Hale, you will control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. My apologies, Your Honor. Hale smoothed his expression, but his eyes stayed cold. But we must call this what it is. Miss Monroe is an unmarried woman living under Mr. Cole's roof, managing his affairs, now making accusations to cover his financial irresponsibility. Her motives are transparent. Her motives are irrelevant, Morrison said. The question is whether the math is correct, and based on what I'm seeing, it's not. He turned to Hale's current clerk. I want a complete audit of Coldwater Bank's loan portfolio, every active loan going back 5 years. Your Honor, that's what's going to happen. And until that audit is complete, I'm issuing an injunction against any foreclosure actions by Coldwater Bank. Morrison's gavel came down again. Mr. Cole's loan payment deadline is suspended pending investigation. This hearing is adjourned. The room exploded into noise. People surged forward, some trying to talk to Morrison, others clustering around Hale. Lydia stood frozen, barely able to process what had just happened. They'd won. Not completely, not finally, but they'd won this round. Ethan was there suddenly, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You did it," he said against her hair. "You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." Maisie wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment they just stood there in the chaos, clinging to each other like survivors of a storm. But the storm wasn't over yet. Hale pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't finished," he said quietly, close enough that only they could hear. "You think you've won? You've just made things worse. I own half this valley. I have friends, influence, power. I will bury you." "No," Lydia said, stepping forward. "You won't. Because people are watching now. They're asking questions. And every family you've cheated, every rancher you've stolen from, they're going to come forward. You're finished." Hale stared at her, and for the first time she saw real fear beneath the anger. "You're nothing. A nobody who stumbled into town in a wedding dress, chasing a man who didn't exist. And you're a thief who hid behind respectability while destroying families," Lydia shot back. "I'd rather be nothing than be you." For a moment she thought he might actually strike her, but Morrison was watching from the bench, and there were too many witnesses. Hale turned on his heel and stalked out, his lawyer hurrying after him. The next hour was a blur. People wanted to shake their hands, tell them stories of their own suspicions about Hale, thank them for having the courage to speak up. Sam Garrett stood straighter than Lydia had yet seen him, fielding questions from ranchers who were starting to do their own calculations. James Thornton found them as the crowd was thinning. "Well done," he said simply. "Hell of a thing, watching you dismantle him with arithmetic." "It's not over," Ethan said. "Morrison still has to complete the audit." "He will, and he'll find exactly what you showed him today. Morrison's honest. That's why Hale's been careful around him. But now that the door's open, he'll follow the evidence wherever it leads." Thornton smiled. "My offer still stands. Once this is settled, I'd like to discuss that partnership." "We'd like that too," Ethan said, glancing at Lydia. They left the courthouse as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Maisie chattered the whole ride home, retelling the hearing from her perspective, her fear transformed into excitement now that the danger had passed. But when they reached the ranch and saw smoke rising from the direction of the barn, excitement turned to horror. "No," Ethan breathed, and then he was running, Lydia right behind him. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking 30 feet into the darkening sky. The horses were screaming, the cattle in the nearby pasture were panicking, breaking through fences in their terror. "Get Maisie to the house," Ethan shouted. "Get water buckets. The horses. I'll get them. Go!" Lydia grabbed Maisie, who was frozen in shock, and ran for the house. She thrust the girl inside. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say. But stay here." She ran back with every bucket she could carry, filling them at the pump. Other neighbors were arriving now, drawn by the smoke, forming a line to pass water. But it was hopeless. The barn was too far gone. Ethan emerged from the inferno leading 2 terrified horses, their eyes rolling white. He thrust the reins at someone and turned back. "Don't!" Lydia screamed. "It's coming down!" But he was already inside. Seconds stretched into eternity. The roof groaned, timbers cracking. Lydia started forward and someone grabbed her arm. "You can't—" She wrenched free just as Ethan staggered out with the last horse, his shirt smoking, his face black with soot. The roof collapsed behind him with a roar like thunder. They fought the fire for hours, keeping it from spreading to the house and other outbuildings. By the time it finally burned itself out, they were all exhausted, covered in ash, stinking of smoke. The barn was gone, just a smoking skeleton of charred timbers. Lydia found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, staring at the ruins. She sat beside him, neither of them speaking for a long moment. "Hale did this," he said finally. "You don't know that." "I know it." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "This is what he meant when he said he'd bury us. He can't beat us in court, so he's going to destroy us another way. We'll rebuild." "With what money? The barn, the feed stores, the equipment. That was thousands of dollars worth of loss. Insurance won't cover arson if we can't prove it, and we can't prove it." Lydia's mind raced, looking for solutions, finding only dead ends. He was right. Even with the loan suspended, even with the partnership with Thornton, this kind of loss could break them. "I have money," she said suddenly. "In Philadelphia. Not enough for everything, but enough to start." Ethan looked at her. "That's your safety net. Your way out if this all falls apart. This is falling apart. Let me help. Lydia, listen to me." She took his hands, felt them trembling with exhaustion and shock. "I came here with nothing. You gave me a place, a purpose, a family. That money sitting in the bank back east isn't my safety net anymore. This is. You are. Let me invest in what matters." "What if it's not enough? What if we lose everything anyway?" "Then we lose it fighting, together." She squeezed his hands. "I'm not leaving. Whatever comes, I'm staying. But I need you to let me help. Not as hired help or as someone grateful for charity. As your partner, your equal." Something in his face crumbled then. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and she felt him shake with silent tears he'd been holding back since the fire started. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice muffled. "I've been scared for 2 years, trying to hold everything together alone. And now you're not alone." Lydia pulled back to look at him. "You have me. You have Maisie. You have Thornton and Garrett and all those people who showed up tonight to help fight the fire. Hale thinks he can destroy us by taking away our resources. But he can't take away our people." Ethan kissed her then, desperate and grateful and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday. Not when things are settled. Now, tomorrow. Let's make this real and legal before anything else can go wrong." Lydia's breath caught. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard." "It's the most honest one you'll get." She laughed despite everything, despite the ashes and the fear and the exhaustion. Yes, I'll marry you." "Yeah? Yeah." He kissed her again, and this time it was softer, sweeter, full of the future they were choosing to build together. The next morning they rode to town, Maisie between them, and found the preacher before breakfast. He married them in his small study with his wife and Maisie as witnesses, the ceremony taking less than 10 minutes. There was no white dress this time, no flowers or music, just simple vows and signatures on a license that made them legally, irrevocably bound. When it was done, Maisie threw her arms around both of them. "Does this mean Miss Lydia is my mama now?" Lydia and Ethan exchanged glances. "What do you think?" Lydia asked gently. "I think she's been acting like a mama for weeks. About time it was official." Maisie grinned. "Can I call you Mama?" Lydia's eyes burned with tears. "I'd be honored." They walked out of the preacher's house as a family, legal and recognized. It felt both monumental and completely natural, like something that had already been true finally being acknowledged aloud. Word of the fire spread quickly, and with it came help they hadn't expected. Ranchers they barely knew showed up with timber and tools. The women brought food, fabric for new clothes to replace what had been smoke damaged. Even some of Hale's former borrowers appeared, quietly contributing money or labor, united by their shared anger at the man who'd cheated them all. Within days, the frame of a new barn was rising. It wouldn't be as large as the old one, not yet, but it would be enough. James Thornton formalized the partnership, investing capital in exchange for a percentage of future profits and a position for his son learning the ranching business. The money from Philadelphia covered new equipment and feed. And then came the telegram from Judge Morrison. The audit was complete. Hale had been systematically defrauding borrowers for over 6 years, stealing an estimated $30,000 through false charges and manipulated interest calculations. Criminal charges were being filed. The bank was being seized by territorial authorities. All loans would be reviewed and adjusted to reflect actual legal amounts owed. Ethan's $1,500 loan, with proper calculations, had a remaining balance of $800, manageable, payable, no longer a sword hanging over their heads. They celebrated quietly that night, just the three of them, around the dinner table. Maisie went to bed happy, and Lydia and Ethan sat on the porch watching stars emerge over the mountains. "I keep thinking about that first day," Lydia said, "when Maisie marched up to me at the train station and asked if I'd marry her daddy." Ethan smiled. She's always been direct. I thought she was crazy. Thought I was crazy for saying yes. And now? Now I think she saw something I couldn't yet. That we needed each other. That we could build something real if we were brave enough to try. She's smarter than both of us, Ethan agreed. He took Lydia's hand, the gesture familiar now, comfortable. I love you. I know I should have said it before, should have made it romantic somehow, but I don't need romantic, Lydia interrupted gently. I need honest. And I love you too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night settle over their land, their ranch, their home. It wasn't perfect. There was still rebuilding to do, still challenges ahead. But they'd face them together. 3 months later, Lydia stood in the rebuilt barn, larger now, sturdier, watching Ethan and Thornton's son work with a new string of cattle. Her hand rested on her stomach, where the smallest flutter of life had just begun. She hadn't told Ethan yet, wanted to be certain, but already she felt the weight of this new responsibility, this new joy. Maisie ran up, breathless from playing with the neighbor children. Mama, come see the new calf. She's so tiny. Show me, Lydia said, letting herself be pulled along, marveling at how naturally the word mama fell from the girl's lips now. The calf was indeed tiny, all spindly legs and huge eyes. Maisie petted it gently while Lydia watched, thinking about the family they'd become, the life they'd built from nothing. She'd come west in a wedding dress, chasing a promise that turned out to be a lie. She'd been abandoned, desperate, with nothing but $11 and stubbornness keeping her upright. But that desperation had led her here. To this ranch, this family, this life that was more real and solid than anything she'd imagined on that train platform. Sometimes the best things came from the worst beginnings. Sometimes getting lost was the only way to find where you belonged. Ethan found her as the sun was setting, slipping his arm around her waist. You all right? Better than all right. She leaned into him. I have news. Good news or bad news? Good. Definitely good. She turned to face him. We're going to need a bigger house. It took him a moment, then his eyes went wide. Are you sure? As sure as I can be this early. Are you happy? Instead of answering, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Maisie came running over, demanding to know what was happening, and when they told her she was going to be a big sister, her shriek of delight probably carried all the way to town. That night, Lydia lay in bed beside her husband, still strange and wonderful to think that word, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, the new barn creaking in the wind, cattle lowing softly in the distance, Maisie's gentle snoring from the room down the hall. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, lost, alone, waiting for a man who never existed to give her life meaning. She'd found meaning anyway, not in being saved, but in saving herself, not in being chosen, but in choosing. She'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, chosen to fight when surrender would have been safer, chosen love when fear would have been simpler. And those choices had given her everything. A home, a family, a future worth fighting for. She'd come west chasing a lie and found the truth instead. Found that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she believed, worthy of love, not because someone else decided it, but because she'd decided it herself. The abandoned bride had become a wife, a mother, a partner, a fighter, had become exactly who she was always meant to be. And that, Lydia thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest triumph of all.